Hello everybody. It is the middle of July 2023 and here's another video on our series of climate change. Today I'm going to do a little bit a different subject. I'm going to talk to you about the psychology of global warming. So what is all this about? Remember that if I make you videos and if I make presentations and write papers about this global warming, the scientific part of it, actually watch the videos in Stallinga.org where we're talking about the scientific method and things like this, and about the greenhouse effect and all these things, then basically a lot of people, they don't have the tools to process this because they don't have the way, they don't have the education. But everybody, of course, everywhere always has the idea of psychology. People understand psychology, even if it is basic psychology, they understand this. So today I'm going to talk about that. It's going to be about two videos. In the first video I will present generally the concepts of psychology relative to global warming, and in the second part I will make the contribution that I will explain the reasoning of people because of what is called Pascal's wager. So buckle up, 2 times half an hour probably, and this is then presented. This is based on the paper that we've written, which is in the European Scientific Journal. It's nearly a decade old, from 2016. You can also get this Department of Information number, but maybe not so useful. Or if in case of trying to find it, just go to Stallinga.org and the links will be there. The links to this video will be there. And of course, below this video in YouTube and Rumble, I will put here the links to this paper as well. So here we go. The idea is we're going to talk about global warming, or climate change if you wish, because climate change, we will see actually they changed it because of psychological reasons. It's no longer called global warming as it was called before. It's now called climate change. And I will use this in the second part especially, by using game theory decision tables. And this game theory decision tables, what should you think about? This is basically about, well, I'll give you an example. Is maybe you know the ones of a prisoner's dilemma, where two people are taken prison and they're being interrogated. That they were accused of having committed a crime, maybe robbing a bank, and then they have to snitch on the other or not, and then they do this. Then they optimize their own probabilities, their own reward. So this is what it's all about. Game theory decisions tables is about strategy to optimize one's own return, and it also I also introduced into that probabilities of these events. But that is basically in the second part. In the first part I will talk about generally about why and how people think in generally about such catastrophic scenarios such as global warming. So here we go. First of all, anthropogenic global warming, it's a classical example, a typical example of a catastrophic idea, and society has always been receptive to such ideas. It is already, as long as humanity exists, people have believed in catastrophes in the future. And in the modern times I can also give you some examples. The Y2K problem, which is also called the millennium bug, that remember that all the computers, they had 2 digits for saving the year in data. And therefore, by the year 2000, they would sort of like reset, and this would have catastrophic events. We would not have electricity for sure, and it would be the risk of launching all the nuclear missiles, so there would be nuclear Armageddon. Of course, nothing happened. And this one is actually was not a vague model, was an exact, precise model, and it exactly and precisely failed. Other ones that are more difficult, doomsday scenarios, are to debunk are this ozone. Scientifically it also doesn't make much sense, but still people probably believe in it, and I'm not going to talk about it here, but I will just show some other examples. Acid rain. There would not be a single tree in the forest standing because of acid rain. Well, that didn't happen, but then they of course say, yeah, because we took good actions against that. Well, not really. And then this is also very interesting. So this is in 2016. I was already talking about the flu virus. And in 2020, as we know, started exactly this idea yet again. They just repeat the doomsday scenarios. So I think this was swine flu, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had, of course, in 2020, we had COVID-19, which is again that everybody was going to die if we didn't take the actions. This is because people's society is receptive to catastrophic ideas. People sort of want to believe in this somehow. What is this anthropogenic global warming? I'm not going to repeat everything there because this is on the videos in Stallinga.org, but the planet has warmed up. But the attribution to human behavior is dubious, as I show in this video. The attribution flows naturally that it's human caused is from the way humans are thinking. As psychiatrist Anderson Thomas describes, we have a great deal of difficulty seeing anything other than human causation. In other words, whatever bad is happening, humans are the cause. And then, of course, we have to be threatened that because of our sins, we are going to hell or something like this. That is then the reward. So the reward for the decision tables, the reward can also be in the future or even afterlife. The funny thing is that the people that believe in these models, for instance, global warming, they readily see then conspiracies. People start thinking in conspiracies. For instance, they see these people that, and then they are attacking people like us, which are more skeptic. We call the non-believers are then, for instance, normally accused of being paid by oil companies. Well, let me inform you here, never a single cent did I get from oil companies. In fact, never a single cent did I get from the taxpayer. And the reason is obvious, because they don't want to spend, as I show in the second part, people will not want to spend money on a non-belief, on actually to spend money on something that goes against their beliefs. So there is no conspiracy, but they will invent a conspiracy anyway. And the conspiracies, they can even be to such an extent that it can have contradicting elements. But it is completely doesn't make sense. But that doesn't matter, because as we show, or as we're going to show and already showed, that reason has been abandoned. This is one of the items as well. Reason has been abandoned. Climate conspiracy believers readily accept that the human-caused climate change causes Europe to both warm up and cool down. So they can hold contradicting ideas in their beliefs, and it doesn't matter because reason doesn't enter. But one of the consequences of this is that it's no longer called global warming, because cooling is also considered a proof of global warming. So they had to change it climate change. So now it's called climate change, and now you know why. Because they want also to use events of cooling as a proof of their model. And the proof of this, as we see, is a bias. I will talk about it in a minute. They have to change it from climate change to, from global warming to climate change. This way, any weather event is seen as evidence for global warming. It is in this way, being a vague theory, it's now a vague theory because it cannot be debunked. And if a theory cannot be debunked, watch the video about the scientific method. If a theory cannot be, an hypothesis cannot be debunked, then the hypothesis is non-scientific, but it's belief. So, being a vague theory, no fact whatsoever will technically ever be able to scientifically debunk the ideas. So it's not science. Science has been abandoned, as I write here. Generally also facts can be ignored or actually incorporated into the ideas. But facts ignoring is what Leo Festinger in 1957 already called his famous paper on famous work on cognitive dissonance, what he calls it. A strong desire of people to keep things simple and to eliminate any dissonance facts. So if dissonant facts come in, instead of changing the beliefs, they change the facts or ignore them. Okay. This is basically what we call a bias. And then when I wrote this manuscript and sent it, then the referee said that I should be a little bit more extensive to write a little bit more, because there can be other reasons than these biases and beliefs. So then I studied this a little bit longer, and I made a quite extensive summary of this, which I'm now also going to present to you. So this part, I talk about biases, and then I will talk about beliefs. A bias is sort of like a distorted view on probabilities of what things that can happen in the future. So what other biases do we have? So the first one is confirmation bias, which is basically looking for evidence of the hypothesis. And this is anti-scientific, as I've shown in the 2 videos on the scientific method. If you're looking for the evidence of your hypothesis, which is called affirming the consequent, and this is not science, because you should be looking for where your hypothesis is wrong. That is science. But this confirmation bias is then that what a lot of scientists, or I should not call them scientists, because they're pseudoscientists, that is pseudoscientists, they are actually researchers, and they're constantly looking for the evidence of global warming everywhere. Other biases is, for instance, the pessimism bias, that the catastrophic scenario has more probability, according to these people, than optimistic scenarios. They are especially people that are suffering from the depression. They overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes. Okay, yeah, it can be. The backfire effect is a little bit stronger than Festinger's cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, you basically ignore the facts, but with backfire effect, the dissonant piece of information, the disconfirming evidence, is actually strengthening their beliefs. Let's say if you have a global warming theory and then it's cooling down, this actually reinforces, strengthens their climate change, that now it's called climate change beliefs. It's called the backfire effect. I will talk a little bit about this in a moment more. The escalation of commitment, that's very funny. That is what most politicians are suffering from. For instance, Al Gore, he put all his effort when he lost the presidential elections. He had to find another cause, and he then selected the global warming committee, the idea. And by now he can no longer turn back. Even though all the evidence is coming in that the global warming is not correct, he cannot give it up. He must then double down on his ideas and actually what is called escalation of commitment. He must commit more and more and more. That's okay if he commits it, but of course he's also committing our resources for that and our structures. So that's called escalation of commitments for politicians. Negative bias is the tendency to pay more attention to negative information than to positive. For instance, all these weather events, if it's flooding, if it's a heat wave, allegedly now we have in Europe, southern Europe, we have a heat wave. I'm sitting in Faro, which is the southwest part of Europe, and it is relatively a little bit below average. It is warm, but it is summer. We are now, what is it, 24th of July. So it's summer and it's warm, yes, but not so hot. As you can see, I'm not sweating. The gambler's fallacy, this is something very interesting. There's 2 versions of it. The first one is called gambler's fallacy, which is that if repeatedly you flip a coin and repeatedly heads are coming up, then people will think, gamblers will think, well, now it must be tails, because we had so many times heads, and I was expecting 50% heads, 50% tails, so now tails must be increased in probability, which of course is a fallacy, and it's a bias which is distorting the probabilities, because the probability continues to be 50-50. But gamblers think that tails will be with increased probability if heads are constantly popping up. The opposite is also actually true. If repeatedly heads are coming up, then people will say, like, hey, wait a second, this coin is not, it's fake, it's flawed, so probably I will change my probability based on previous data. I will change my probabilities for the future. And then I will actually, when the heads are coming up, I will increase the probability of tails. This is what we call in another paper the retrodiction, or actually also in the scientific method paper video, you can also see this, which is what we call retrodiction, which is basically predicting the past, which is of course is a funny way of saying it, because the past everybody can predict. So all the models of the IPCC can predict the past. They never were able to predict the future. It is the basis of empirical forecasting, and the entire idea of empirical forecasting is very much flawed. I will write another video on this, but I can tell you already, if you want to look at it, I have also looked in Stallinga.org on my publications. There is one about empirical forecasting, which according to Aristotle is nonsense, because only that what can happen will happen. I will say this phrase in a couple of seconds again. Actually, Nassim Taleb, he wrote a very nice book, The Black Swan, in which he actually shows where this retrodiction is going wrong. Because this is the Black Swan theory is the real occurrence that a beautiful explanation, scientific explanation, was developed why swans must be white. And then a black swan was found when Australia was discovered, showing that your retrodiction can be complete nonsense for the future probabilities. So this gambler's fallacy is a bias that you're distorting the real probabilities. Illusionary correlation is inaccurately perceiving a relationship between two unrelated events. For instance, the correlation between carbon dioxide and the temperature, it might be complete nonsense, or it might actually be reverse. Anyway, it is inaccurately seeing this relationship. It can be completely random, the correlation between two things. And there are some internet pages. I think there's even a book about these funny correlations between things, like what was it? The global temperature and the number of pirates in the world. That seems to be very highly correlated. Well, that's probably a random event. The ludic fallacies, coined by the same Nassim Taleb, is assuming nature is working in a probabilistic way, and as Mr. Aristotle said, there are no probabilities in nature, only that what what will happen can happen. So tomorrow it will rain or it will not rain. So either the probability of raining is 100% or it is 0%, but there is not like 30% rain tomorrow. It's 100% or 0%. The curse of knowledge is the effect, it's another bias, so all these pink thingies are bias. The curse of knowledge is the effect that knowledge of a topic diminishes one's neutrality. So, for instance, climatologists cannot but think there is something wrong with the climate, because they're actually paid for saying there is a problem with the climate. Otherwise, if they say there's nothing wrong with the climate, they will be without a job. So that is the curse of knowledge. They distort the probabilities, and that's bias. The false consensus effect. It is a tendency of people overestimating how much other people agree with them. This is actually data distortion caused by our positive feedback and peer reviewing publishing system. I'm not going to repeat this here. It is explained in this video on the scientific method, and also in our paper on the Monte Carlo methods and applications from 2015, or what's the video about the scientific method. It is basically that this consensus in literature about the global warming is actually it's fake, or it can be fake. Expectation bias and selection bias, or as we say, trust your models, facts can be disposed of. It is also called the Semmelweis reflex, the tendency to ignore correlations or to reject new evidence that contradicts a paradigm. So just everything that agrees with your data, keep it, and all the data that don't agree with you, just throw them away. And this happens quite a lot in science, in research in general. Sanctification bias, that is a nice one, is that the people, they actually think of themselves as morally superior to the others, and that is that their group is somehow favored, that they know the truth, that others are ignorant and want to protect that truth. And that any disagreement is because the others, like people like me, we are the outside world, we are not part of this group, is inherently flawed or evil or misguided. So scientists like me are called evil deniers. Well, so be it. I've been called worse. This is the availability heuristic is what I think is absolutely the most relevant to this entire story of the global warming. And I will read here a passage of the book of Nobel Prize winning Daniel Kahneman. He studied the psychology in the economy, but this exact same psychology is also applicable in the study of the climate. Let me read it, and I will put in between my comments and my comments on my comments. So here we go. This is from the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which you must read, of Kahneman, because it explains a lot. It says there, an availability cascade is a self-sustaining chain of events which may start from media reports of a relatively minor event and lead up to public panic and large-scale government action. Okay, so my comment in this is that the media report was the article in Scientific American of Roger Revelle in 1982, writing his pessimistic, there we go again, pessimistic, the bias, pessimistic outlook on the climate to justify his research grants. He just needed money, and for that you have to say that his research should be funded, otherwise the planet is going to die. This triggered the response of Nobel Prize winning politician Al Gore. There you get it. Exactly as Mr. Kahneman says. Then Kahneman continues, on some occasions a media story about a risk catches the attention of a segment of the public which becomes aroused and worried. So this is this entire youth, No Planet B, what is the name of this youth group that is now constantly gluing themselves to the streets and so on. They are worried and they start aroused and come into action. This emotional reaction becomes a story in itself, prompting conditional coverage in the media, exactly, which in turn, Extinction Rebellion I wanted to say, this is this aroused and worried people, which in turn produces greater concern and involvement. The cycle is sometimes sped along deliberately by availability entrepreneurs, individuals or organizations who work to ensure a continuous flow of worrying news. Well, in this we can recognize the IPCC thriving on the fear of climate change, which they then set out to prove scientifically incorrect. Without global warming, the panel itself, the United Nations, would cease to exist. Kahneman continues, the danger is increasingly exaggerated as the media compete for attention-grabbing headlines. Scientists and others who try to dampen the increasing fear and revulsion attract little attention, most of it hostile. Anyone who claims that the danger is overstated is suspected of association with a heinous cover-up. The issue becomes politically important because it's on everyone's mind, and the response of the political system is guided by the intensity of the public sentiment. The availability cascade has now reset priorities. Other risks and other ways of resources could be applied for the public good all have faded into the background. And that is indeed what you're seeing. Now we're wasting a lot of money and effort on a thing that has been just a result of the availability heuristic bias. It is a positive feedback system where politicians are increasing the worries, the media are increasing the worries, the availability entrepreneurs, all the media, all the non-governmental organizations, they all increase the fear because they all gain by it. The only one that loses by it is the public in general, which are having to pay for all this. Politicians are now hindered by the escalation of commitment, as we've seen already above. This is a positive feedback thing, as part of the positive feedback. And the availability cascade can, and as we see here, can even reach pan-global economy-wrecking proportions, exactly as we are seeing now taking place in front of us. So these are all these biases, or these are some biases. There are thousands of biases, but which are relevant for the alarmists, for how they are distorting the probabilities of things. But there's also, of course, people, or the skeptics, or of the people, the deniers, if you wish. They can also be accused of having a bias. For instance, the omission bias, the tendency to just judge harmful actions as worse than equally harmful inactions. Okay. The ostrich effect, or putting your head in the sand, is the ignoring a possible negative situation. Just because I don't like it, I think if I put my head in the sand, the negative thing will not happen. Hyperbolic discounting is the tendency of people to have stronger preference for more immediate payoffs. Okay, yes, so I don't care if tomorrow the planet is going to all burn, as long as I have today I have a good life. Okay, yes, can be. The reactance, this is actually also happens quite a lot, is the urge to do the opposite of what someone wants to do. So if everybody tells that we should behave a certain way, we're all behaving like small children, that we want to do exactly the opposite. I also want to point out that this is the basis of science, that if they say something that it's like this and this, exactly trying to find out why not. that reactance is another ingredient of science. Can also have a biased blind spot. Well, I can actually be accused of it myself. I don't know, because of course I would have a blind spot. The biased blind spot is the tendency to see oneself as less biased than other people. Yes, well, maybe I have a biased blind spot. Maybe the only thing I can say is I do my best to not have a biased blind spot. But there we go. This is basically, it's possible. These are all the biases. And then later I will talk about, I will introduce this, the new idea we put here is that the global warming belief is caused by Pascal's wager. And Pascal's wager, he himself, Blaise Pascal, said, in his exact words, "I do not know whether God exists, but I know that I have nothing to gain from being an atheist if he does not exist, whereas I have plenty to lose if he does. Hence, this justifies my belief in God." So you already see some kind of decision tables with probabilities and so on, and with rewards. So this is what we're going to talk about in the second video. But the most, now the second part of this video, I would like to talk to you about why people believe something. The first part was about why people have a bias, and here I now want to explain to you why people believe in something. If it's not Pascal's wager, which is actually very nice, you can nearly calculate the thing in Pascal's wager. It's a very beautiful system to explain it in, but there can also be other reasons. The first one, of course, is obvious. It's that you see, seeing is believing if you have the evidence. But the problem with this is, once again, then we have the bias. The general idea is that it's absolutely threatening to admit you're wrong. So even if the evidence is coming in, people with cognitive dissonance, they will ignore this because they don't want to admit that they were wrong, generally. So they will ignore the fact, or they will adopt the fact into their belief system. So it's not so easy as that. People find proof for conspiracies. Oh yeah, okay, I said this already. I want to say this. This is also funny. As an example, that there are no conspiracies nowhere. There is no proof or anywhere for conspiracies. But instead of admitting that there are no conspiracies, people will say then exactly the opposite. It's a backfiring effect. Is that people will say, of course there are no conspiracies, because these conspiracies are hidden from your view by the conspiracy itself. So the proof for the conspiracy is the fact that there is no proof for the conspiracy. Do you get it? This is the backfire effect, that even evidence cannot make people believe things. There's another reason why people believe things, is that this belief gene, or meme, as I think you should call it instead of Dawkins. Darwin is about genes, and Dawkins is about memes, about what people think. But they also have a survival rate in the gene pool. So people believe because they have been naturally born to believe this. The other thing is, which I call a fascism, in which I'm now preparing a complete work and a complete study on this with simulations and all, is that people actually, they copy the belief of others to be part of a group. And why? Well, this is economic reasons. They believe they don't have to spend time on thinking about this, what they believe, but they believe this so that they can join with the others and steal the wealth of third parties. It's called fascism. I will, probably in a year or two, I will write a video about that as well. Similar to this Dawkins, is that people inherit the belief. For instance, our people have always believed this and this and this. That's why you see that society has been divided into blocks, in regions, where within a region people are basically believing that kind of things. It is again sort of a group behavior. People want to belong to the group, and our group believes this thing, so I believe that. That is also why you have to install this belief very young into people, as Plato, I think it was, he said, give me the boy at age 7 and I will give you the man at age 20, or something like this. Maybe I have it distorted in my mind, but something like this. You have to take very ignorant, young, empty-headed people and put the belief system into their heads. So that is, for instance, why the United Nations, through the UNESCO, has teaching packages to pour the global warming belief into young people's heads. Another reason why people believe is very funny, especially politicians, is the self-delusion. It is actually believing in one's own lies. Especially politicians believe this. There was, for instance, the Ronald Reagan. So the story goes. Ronald Reagan, he invented the story about the welfare queen that lived on welfare and so on. Well, he invented it, but he completely believed it himself in this lie. And the other one here is Frans Timmermans, from the European Union. He invented the story during this, or after the MH17 airplane disaster. He invented the story that a young girl was found with an oxygen mask on her head, signifying that she knew she was going to die and still had time to put the oxygen mask on. And he was then using this emotional argument to start a campaign of hate against Russia. And actually, well, at least he admitted later that this was a lie and he shouldn't have done it. But this shows at that time he really believed that it was like this. And that is called self-delusion. That's believing in one's own lies. Another one is faith. Why do I believe? Because it's nice to believe. I have faith. Faith gives me a nice feeling. Of course it gives a nice feeling in terms of thermodynamics, because if you have faith, if you believe, you don't have to think. And according to Kahneman, especially type 2 thinking, it costs a lot of energy and it's unpleasant. So it's much nicer to believe that you have faith. So you want to you believe because you want to believe, because you know that this is a low energy state. Martin Luther then actually says, very interesting statement, reason is the biggest enemy that faith has. So basically, this belief in something that goes against science, and I will in the second part also talk about belief and science, but that is, faith is another reason why people believe certain things. Another one here is called, it's called induction. That is, to believe in things that are a logical conclusion, logical result of other things that are believed. For instance, I believe wood burns and that trees are made of wood. Therefore, it makes sense that trees burn. I do not need to see them burn to believe that, that trees will burn. Another belief reason can be authority, and this is used quite a lot. That if an authority is saying something, then I believe it, because who am I to go against the authority? That is why they have created the authority of the climate change, exactly so that people will believe it because of the authority. The Pan-Global Political Institute, not Scientific Institute, but they claim that they are the authority, and that's why people will believe it. Similar to this is the creation of experts. So that is why you see on television, on any subject, you see people called in and being called experts, whether it be climate change or COVID-19 or the war in Ukraine or any other subject. As long as there is a political agenda, they call in experts so that you will have rather more tendency to believe what is being said than if some random idiot from the street is being questioned about it. However, this same effect is masked by what is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Namely, that unskilled individuals, stupid people, let's call it like this, suffer from the illusory superiority, mistakenly rating their own ability much higher than average. Or here I found this phrase someday from Ronald Bailey. He said it in a very funny way: everyone that knows what they're talking about agrees with me, and everyone who doesn't wears a tinfoil hat. So low unskilled individuals, stupid people, they basically calling even scientists, they call them stupid and call them deniers and conspiracy thinkers, because people like us, we wear a tinfoil hat. Not that they understand the climate, but because they believe the experts, they believe the authorities, and therefore I must be set away by cognitive dissonance and seeing conspiracies and seeing that I must be a complete idiot and wear a tinfoil hat. As you can see, it all starts making sense. Another thing is why people believe something is that that there is a consensus, or they think there is a consensus. The consensus is actually the most often heard argument to convince people, while we all learn at school that consensus itself is never a scientific argument. That doesn't matter for these people. They see a consensus, they imagine a consensus, therefore they believe what is behind the consensus. Now, this is then all these techniques are used and actually already presented by the book of propaganda, something about propaganda of Edward Bernays. And this is actually being used on a large scale by all these availability entrepreneurs and by the politicians to change our way of thinking. And actually researchers are studying this, how to do this best. They read the book of Bernays and implementing the book of Bernays. As an example, Erot and Segnit, they say, let me quote them here. Listen very carefully how bad this is. The task of climate change agencies is not to persuade by rational argument. Instead, we need to work in a more shrewd and contemporary way, using subtle techniques of engagement. The facts need to be treated as being so taken for granted that they need not be spoken. Of course, because these facts are mostly actually lies. Ultimately, positive climate behaviors need to be approached in the same way as marketeers approach acts of buying and consuming. It amounts to treating climate-friendly activity as a brand that can be sold. This, we believe, is the route to mass behavior change. Now, this comes directly, this could have been a phrase of the book of Edward Bernays about propaganda. This is typical propaganda. And another one who wrote it in such a way is Rudman. He says that, listen to this, it gets even worse. Our hope is that researchers will design persuasion strategies that effectively change people's implicit attitudes without them having to suffer through a disaster. Change people's persuasion strategies, change people's implicit attitudes. Ladies and gentlemen, that is, persuasion strategy is a euphemism for mind conditioning and brainwashing and indoctrination. And I would like to talk to say, if I meet these people, Erot and Segnit and Rudman, that have you thought about if maybe you yourself are a victim of the shrewd and contemporary ways and the subtle techniques of your changing your mind, and to have persuaded you by persuasion strategies to have changed your implicit attitudes. Rudman, Erot and Segnit, have you imagined that you may be victims and not actually the perpetrators of the crime that's going on here? For me, it doesn't matter. This is completely from the book of propaganda, indoctrination, and so on. To give you an idea, if you're indoctrinated, if you're getting physical discomfort from the words that I'm saying, that is the telltale sign that you're indoctrinated. If you're getting like, who is this sick idiot that is now talking? If you get this subconscious physical discomfort when I'm talking, then you're indoctrinated, and I would suggest you go for a de-indoctrination program. Another thing is that very often they use percentages because they are more convincing. If you say for sure this and this and this is going to happen, nobody will listen. But if you say 95% of probability it will happen, apparently people listen to it more. That is a small detail that comes also from the book of Bernays, that you should use percentages, probabilities, and not certainties. This also makes use from the effect heuristic. That is more, see the paper of Yudkowsky and so on. I am already nearly at the end of this video. Let me just, because here I will break. Let me say just one more thing, that some interesting fact is that apparently, according to a study here, stupid people are more likely to adhere to this global warming scenario ideas, the belief, than intelligent people. As Cahan and Hamilton write, members of the public with the highest degrees of science literacy and technical reasoning capacity were not the most concerned about climate change. So then let's put it on a scale. Horizontally we put the belief in horizontally we put the scientific qualities and the technical reasoning capacity of people, and vertically we put the belief scale. And we will see that for an infinite intelligent person, the belief is 0, or in other words, they know that climate change model is nonsense. Now, in the second video, which also will link here below, I'm going to explain to you why I think people believe in this climate change model. It is called Pascal's wager. I will then put it in game theory decision tables like this about belief and not believing, and if it's true or not true. Okay, so that I will then do in the second part, in the second video about this subject. So I hope you enjoyed this part, and please join me in the second video on this subject. See you then.